Chapter 1. Ripley felt the little girl's arms tighten around her neck as she slammed the lift button repeatedly. The Queen was almost certainly right behind them. They were going to die down here. The thought filled her with a sudden dizzying wave of sickness, and she hit the button again. They were going to die in this hellish, humid, artificial pit on a crumbling planet, a big piece of which was itself about to be blown into atomic dust. Come on, God damn it! She hiked the crying child up higher and looked back over her shoulder into the darkness. Steam hissed from a ruptured pipe, adding a hot fog to the dankness of the alien spittle covering the walls. She could feel it coming, could almost hear the rapid steps of the approaching mother, even over the screaming alarms and sirens. She had destroyed its children, hundreds of its deadly offspring, and she had no doubt that it was on its way to rip her and the girl apart. She looked up then, saw the bottom of the lift slowly descending, still a few floors up. Any second now. From behind them came a piercing scream, inhuman, full of rage. Ripley instinctively clutched her weapon tighter and ran to the ladder attached to the wall. Maybe they could catch the elevator on the next level up. "Hold on to me!" she shouted. And then she was there. Like the others, but larger, swollen, even if no longer gravid. The Queen had a huge crown, a comb of glossy black that swept up and back from her misshapen head. A second set of arms, smaller, jutted from her chest. She, moved slowly towards them from around a corner a few meters away, hissing and drooling. Ripley backed away. The girl tightened her small, sweaty hands in a finger lock to keep from falling. The lift, it was here. Ripley spun. The door opened, the mesh gate slid away, and they jumped in. Ripley slapped the control button more frantically than before. The Queen ran towards them. The wire gate closed, shut a second before the alien got there. Ripley put the girl down, pointed her flamethrower at the creature, fired through the mesh. The fuel was low. Only thin and weak spurts of flame came out, but it was enough to stop the alien. The Queen snarled. Thick streams of slime dripped from her open jaws. She held back. The outer door closed. Safe. They were safe. The ride up was rough. Explosions rocked the building. Falling pieces of debris slammed into their all too slowly rising lift. But they made it to the flight deck. As the outer door opened, a calm female voice informed them that they had 2 minutes to get to minimum safe distance from the site before the whole processing plant blew itself into non-existence. They ran together from the lift and... where the fuck was the ship? It was gone. Their ride had taken off. That goddamned machine, the android, had betrayed them. Ripley screamed in anger, pulled the little girl towards her. Flames leaped all around. The building rocked and shook with deafening noise, and now, another sound. Ripley looked at the lifts. Another elevator coming up. Oh no, it couldn't be. The Queen couldn't know how to operate an elevator. She couldn't. But she is smart, a little voice said inside Ripley's head. You saw her when she realized you were going to burn her eggs. How she waved the drones off, kept them away from you. At first. Ripley looked at her carbine. The counter said it was out of ammo. The flamethrower taped to the gun was also dry. She dropped the weapon, picked up the child, backed away. The lift came to a stop. The door slid open. Ripley hugged the girl tightly. Close your eyes, baby, she said, and closed her own. Ripley, are you okay? Ripley opened her eyes and looked at Billie, the young woman sitting across from her. Billie looked concerned, a slight frown creasing her brow. Ripley liked her, had liked her in the first moment or so of meeting. Unusual. Trust was hard to come by these days, at least for her. But Billie's account of her childhood rescue had stirred up some stories of Ripley's own. "Yeah," she said, and then sighed. "Sorry. I got lost there for a minute. Anyway, the last thing I really remember is settling into sleep after LV-426. Me and one of the soldiers, and a civilian, a little girl. I guess the ship must have sustained some damage somewhere along the way. I don't remember anything else. I woke up in a crowd of refugees on Earth 6 weeks ago, and they were on their way here. It seemed like a good idea. Everything was falling to shit down there. So I've only been here a month longer than you have." Billie nodded. "So, what did the medics say about the missing part? Physical or psych damage?" "I don't do medics," she said, smiling a little. "Besides, I feel fine." Ripley stood and stretched her arms over her head. "Want to walk with me to dinner?" Billie glanced curiously at the older woman as they headed towards the cafeteria. She was the first survivor, so far as anyone knew, to have seen the aliens and gone back for more. Billie found herself intrigued by Ripley's relaxed, confident demeanor, a calmness that seemed unlikely after all she must have been through, especially given her own experiences with the monsters. Even after only 2 weeks here, it seemed like a million years had passed. They walked down C corridor towards the nearest dining hall. There was a viewing plate adjacent to the hatchway that led them down to another corridor. Peering out of the window was a young couple, both medtechs by the look of their IDs, holding hands and talking quietly. Billie saw one whole stretch of the station from her vantage point, long tubes set into spheres and cubes, assembled like a giant's toy. She shivered slightly from the cold as they neared the hatch. The station was made from heavy plastic and cheap lunar metals. Heat came from baseboard heaters set along each corridor, but the void outside kept the corridors from ever really getting warm. Apparently, the newer modules were worse, exposed plastic beams and cramped quarters with poor facilities and lights. They had been slapped together to field the incoming refugees from Earth, the flood of people that had finally tapered to a trickle. Gateway Orbital Station now held somewhere around 17,000, almost twice the number it was intended for. But it wouldn't need to hold many more. As Ripley said, things were falling to shit down there. Though it was early for dinner, the hall was crowded. There had been a midday shipment of real vegetables from one of the hydroponic gardens, and word had spread fast. Billie and Ripley both got small salads of carrot and lettuce to go with their meals. They sat at one of the smaller tables near the entrance. In spite of the crowd, it was quiet. Most of the people on Gateway had lost friends and family to the aliens on Earth. It was almost like people were embarrassed to laugh or have a good time. Billie could understand that. She had spent much of her life in various psych wards, trying to convince medtechs that the aliens existed. The solemn atmosphere of the station was familiar, if not comforting. She didn't feel particularly at home here, but then she'd never really had a home. At least her life wasn't in danger, and that was something. After the trip with Wilks, being safe seemed almost like a dream. Ripley ate a bite of her heated soy pro and made a face. Tastes like insulation that's been dehydrated, frozen, and reheated, then spit on. Billie tasted her own, then nodded. At least it's warm. They ate quietly, each concentrating on her meal. So, Do you dream of her, the mother alien? Billie looked up from her tray, startled. Ripley watched her intently. I do, she continued. At least I did, before my memory lapse. She took another bite of Soypro. Yeah, I do too. I've heard that others have dreams. Billie trailed off. Yeah, she had heard the stories, mostly about fanatics, people that had turned their dreams of the aliens into some kind of religion. The chosen, who had realized that Judgment Day had already come. She'd mostly kept quiet about her own dreams, but recently... I have them often, almost every night. Ripley nodded. It got that way with me too. They started with her reaching out, expressing love, and turned into these. I felt a connection. They were transmissions. I knew where she was, that she wanted to gather her children to her. The Queen of Queens, the driving force behind the whole goddamn species. I knew where to find her. She pushed her tray aside abruptly. And I lost her. Billie nodded. I knew I wasn't the only one, but I haven't had a lot of time to think about it lately, and this station doesn't offer a whole lot in the way of group therapy sessions. Ripley smiled, a short, bitter expression. I think I know what she's waiting for, she said. And I have an idea. We need to find more dreamers. What about Wilks? Billie shrugged. I know he dreams, but I don't think it's in the same way I do. That doesn't mean much. He keeps to himself. We could ask him. She glanced around, although she figured he had gone for a workout. In their 2 weeks at the station, Wilks had spent most of his time in some gym or another. I'm supposed to meet him later, for a drink. I'd like to come along, if it's not intruding, Ripley said. It seemed she chose her words with care. No problem, you're welcome. Billie smiled, and Ripley smiled back. A much easier expression than before. Billie found herself liking this woman more and more. Wilks had been cycling for the better part of an hour, working up a real good sweat. When he noticed the young boy sitting in the corner with his head resting on his hands. He had been concentrating on the vid screen in front of him. A level 9 cycle run that was going to make him hurt like hell tomorrow, or he might have seen the boy earlier. It was one of the station's smaller gyms, and he liked it that way. The larger workout rooms could hold 200, and that many people sweating in one place wasn't particularly appealing, especially given the smell of recycled air. And he didn't care much for crowds. The kid was maybe 10 or 11, a thin, pale boy with dark hair and a neutral expression. He stared at nothing, his chin resting on his knees. Something about him reminded Wilks of himself at that age. Maybe it was the build or the hair. Maybe the blankness. He could relate to that. Wilks had grown up in a small town on Earth, in the southern United States, raised by his aunt. His mother had died of breast cancer when he was 5, after his father had left the two of them the year before. Aunt Kerry was nice enough, but didn't spend much time with him. She worked the night shift at a rest home, and was rather indifferent to his life. Little Davy Arthur Wilks had enough to eat and clothes to wear, and that was her responsibility as she saw it. That and nothing else. Kerry Green did not understand much of anything, and sure as hell not little boys. They didn't discuss his parents often. His mother was a saint who had done nothing but give love to Davy. His father, a no-account bastard son of a bitch who had nothing but his own best interests at heart. David, who hated being called Davy, wasn't so sure. He couldn't really remember either of them, and although he knew his mother wasn't going to come back, he did dream of his father coming to get him one day, standing on their weather-beaten porch with a smile for his son and things to play with and a new place to live. His dad was handsome and strong and smart and didn't take shit from nobody. It was late summer, 2 days after his 11th birthday. David lay on the floor of their small, stuffy living room with his newest Dano Cruz Action Man comic. Dano was in the middle of kicking some serious bad guy butt when there was a knock at the door. Aunt Kerry was resting her eyes in the back bedroom, so David answered, expecting a salesman. A tall man holding a brightly wrapped box stood there. "David?" The guy was badly in need of a shave and wore a shabby suit a few years out of date, the Sinlin frayed at the cuffs. "Yeah, why?" David stepped back from the door a little. He didn't know this man with bright blue eyes. Well, hi. I knew it was your birthday and, well, I was in town. Here." The stranger pushed the box towards him. David took it and looked at him. "Who are you?" "Oh, hell." The stranger smiled weakly. "I'm Ben. I was a friend of your mother's." Ben looked at his watch, then back at David. "Happy birthday, Davy. Listen, I gotta get going. I'm supposed to meet someone. You know how it is." He looked at David helplessly. David stared, unable to speak. His father's name was Ben. He clutched the package tightly. The wrapping crinkled under his grip. Ben. The man turned and walked away, without looking back. David stood there for a long time before he closed the door. He tried to tell himself that it wasn't true, that this Ben wasn't his dad. It couldn't be. He wouldn't just come here, drop this present off, and leave. He wouldn't do that. "Davy!" His aunt, risen from her nap, padded towards him. "Was that somebody at the door? What have you got there?" The boy stared at her. He shook his head. "It wasn't anybody important," he said. He tossed the present at the shiny copper ash bucket his aunt kept next to the antique wood stove. In the gym, Wilks shook his head again. Jesus, some of those old tapes were real fucking hard to get rid of. He stared at the boy. "Hey kid, you won't build any muscle sitting on your butt like that." The boy looked at him, some kind of big-eyed bird. "Here, let me show you how that machine works." It wasn't much, but it was something Wilks could do. Nobody had ever done it for him. The smile on the boy's face was worth $1 million, easy. And it didn't cost Wilks anything at all.